In my video, Why Is There So Much High School Anime?, I painted a bleak picture of Japanese working life. With that obsessive, oppressive work environment I laid out, how can you create a show within it then? Of course you could sugarcoat things, but generally more effectively, you could simply create a story about absurdly obsessive devotion to one's work. If the characters love what they do, then you can get a similar thrill to the fiery spirit of a shonen protagonist trying to pierce the heavens by watching them pursue that passion, and the all-consuming nature of their work helps towards that end, instead of undermining enjoyment of the series by being soul-crushing. In Fune wo Amu, this is especially well done, with it serving to create an intensely endearing atmosphere of camaraderie amongst the characters, but also playing into and enhancing someone like Majime specifically, with his single-mindedness and what seems to likely be some kind of high-functioning autism. Similarly to Rakugo Shinju earlier in 2016, this is a mature, well-crafted series, barring occasionally inconsistent animation quality, about nuanced, well-developed adults in the adult world, which is something many anime fans lament a lack of and seem to pine for. With these two series, I think we've been shown the formula for creating anime that fulfill this expressed desire on the part of those members of the community with more refined tastes, even if this is a bit of a niche being catered to, and a type of series that will likely be sentenced to a cult following and not much beyond that. What both Rakugo and Fune do is choose a profession to center their narratives around, and then find engaging themes that are directly tied to those specific professions to explore, utilizing characters who themselves have particularly special ties to those themes. Rakugo is an art form steeped in tradition, and one that began to undergo a kind of identity crisis as the 20th century went on, things like radio and television supplanting it as the go-to source of relatively cheap entertainment for the masses. In characters like Kikuhiko and Sukeroku, this generational conflict plays out in a number of ways. First and foremost, we have a contrast between the old and the new respectively, with Kikuhiko embodying everything the old guard of Rakugo believe the art form should be, and Sukeroku being an upstart who scoffs at tradition and panders to what they perceive as the lowest common denominator. The far more interesting dynamic at work, however, is Kikuhiko's search for identity, mirroring the state of the art of Rakugo itself during the troubled times the 20th century began presenting it with. Sukeroku too has his own arc tied to a broader thematic idea. He finally relents to Miyokichi and vows to give up Rakugo in order to pursue honest work, and in that same scene he dies, the willing death of his art causing the inevitable death of the artist. Positive Select details these ideas wonderfully in his video on the series, so I'll just point you towards that for further thoughts on it. Fune wo Amu's subject matter is admittedly somewhat less evocative, and I believe a large part of what has led to it being less popular than even the cult status Rakugo now occupies. If you are interested in anime as a Japanese storytelling medium, then something which has a stellar implementation of another traditional Japanese storytelling medium is something that will naturally be of potential interest to you. A story about the creation of dictionaries is a pitch that's a bit more difficult to make that exciting. What it must do, then, is form a compelling tie between that task and the protagonist who will be performing it, in order to give us some vicarious investment in it. The best brief description of our protagonist Majime is given to us by Matsumoto, when he says, "He may know many words, but he lacks the ability to express what he's feeling." And that characterization of him goes a long way towards forming that all-important tie. Majime has some fairly significant difficulties interacting with people, failing to grasp many basic social cues. For him, dictionaries and language are a guide he clings to in order to attempt to form a common understanding with people. To use the show's own metaphor, they are a boat that can carry him across the vast sea of words. It's a metaphor that is conveyed quite powerfully through how the show brings it to life, and this great execution serves to help us understand how Majime experiences things in day-to-day interactions, always being at risk of drowning in a conversation whose little cues he can't keep up with. The informative cinematography doesn't restrict itself to these flashier sequences either. Neat tricks like hiding the bottle of alcohol from our view in the same way that Nishioka asking him a question totally removed awareness of it from Majime's attention in this scene further cement our empathy with him. We are steadily fed situations in which Majime's struggles with communication are highly relevant, starting with his excellent romance with Kaguya. You get an awkwardness that is rather typical of many anime on his end, but it's really endearing in this series because there's such a well-established basis for that awkwardness. Every interaction with Kaguya involves him grappling with the limits of his social abilities and that struggle to communicate that is such a central tenet of his character. And when we understand the source of a character's struggles and they make sense as something that would challenge that character, it gives us an instinct to root for them. Whereas when that awkwardness feels like it lacks any solid basis, when it's unearned, it tends to just evoke feelings of frustration. In Asterisk War, I'm left shouting, "Why are you turning down this prime opie, you cock?" and a protagonist who is clearly attracted to the character basically offering herself to him no strings attached, when we are given no specific backstory or philosophical principle he holds that would lead to him turning her offer down, because his reaction to it is to literally run away out of the room and out of the building without attempting any kind of conversation in order to come to an understanding with her, or just, resolve things like a real human would. Majime's behavior, on the other hand, is an entirely natural result of who he is as a person, and is able to capitalize on one of the most basic ways in which to endear us to a character, having them struggle against a deeply ingrained personal shortcoming. Short characters with complexes about their heights, clumsy ones who will insist that their coordination is totally fine. This is incredibly go-to stuff, because it works. But as I outlined, Fune wo Amu goes beyond merely capitalizing on this endearing effect with Majime by creating that link between his personal struggles and the larger themes of the series. This struggle then continues when a new employee, Kishibe, joins the dictionary department and he must once again come up against the limits of his abilities to communicate with others. But by this point he's grown enough that the dynamic is different than it was with Kaguya. Now that he's had a lot of time to grow as a person, he's gotten much closer to being at a point where this is the best he'll be able to do with his limitations. And one of the most effective tools for working with those limitations has become relying on the assistance of those people around Majime. Those who have spent years working with him have grown to understand him, and help this new team member to begin coming to an understanding of him as well. That in turn contributes to the atmosphere of camaraderie I mentioned Fune wo Amu containing. Right after transferring to the dictionary department, Majime expressed his uneasiness about his ability to communicate effectively with the rest of his co-workers to his landlady with whom he is fairly close, to which she replies, "If you work hard to express your feelings to them, everyone will work hard to accommodate you," laying out the presence of that very goodwill that fuels everyone's assistance of Kishibe in understanding Majime. Everyone is working towards the completion of this dictionary. Nishioka is dealt a significant blow as a result of his efforts towards this end, taking a verbal beating from a company executive to which he has no comebacks, only to be vindicated in a similar scene later on where he's able to shift the power balance and come out on top this time. And this little arc is satisfying not only on a character level, but because they represent successes for the dictionary department as a whole, which we've become invested in by now, with another character eventually working until his death to see the project through to completion. Beyond being an overall nice guy, Majime is truly valued because he is the kind of person perfectly suited for dictionary making. The kind of person Matsumoto and Araki lament the lack and even potential non-existence of in the show's opening scene. The same single-minded fixation that can lead him to enjoy staring at people going up and down an escalator as he ponders the philosophical implications of that act is one which allows him to tirelessly go through entry after entry, and once again enjoy doing so. And knowing this parallel would likely exist is what got Araki so excited the instant he heard about this strange hobby. I will admit that even with the interesting and well-established thematic ties, it was tough to get quite as invested in dictionary making as these characters were, making the portion of the show around episodes 4 through 6 a bit dull, as character establishment had slowed down, relationships had formed, and the series moved into a grind of working towards that final goal. But suddenly I was 8 episodes in, and I had this total geek gushing about how they've engineered this paper to retain its strength and its thickness and its opacity, but allow them the room to squeeze in an extra 10,000 entries, and I was utterly captivated because he cares so much about this that when he's made aware of the fact that the pages aren't sticky enough, he takes that shit incredibly personally and vows to make amends for that shortcoming, and goddamn does people getting this invested in the act of creating something as pointless as a dictionary. I think Google's got that covered already, guys! Speak to me on a personal level as someone trying to make a living off of talking about cartoons on the internet. Majime encapsulates the primary themes of this show, and I think I fell in love with it for the same reasons Kaguya fell in love with him. A shared experience of working with intense devotion towards your passion, aware of the fact that you're playing the long game by doing so. This is a somewhat limited audience Fune wo Amu's strongest appeal caters to, and it certainly doesn't make itself look too appealing based on premise alone, which hits upon a key point in this discussion of great anime. People such as Digibro have bemoaned the focus on premise that the anime community has, correctly arguing that while a more interesting premise certainly may have a higher ceiling in terms of how great a show it could be should it be well made, the premise has virtually no bearing whatsoever on how good the execution of that premise will be. With any given premise, promising or otherwise, having the potential to be an atrocious show depending upon its execution, looking to them would be quite foolish if you're trying to find what will be good in great shows. I believe Fune wo Amu to be one of those great shows. The themes of devotion to a passion and learning to communicate with people are tied to both the protagonist and the overarching narrative excellently. We have a really grounded and endearing romance, hardships and losses are experienced, but ultimately an immense amount of intense labor results in a satisfying payoff with the eventual completion of the dictionary. And all of this is presented with solid cinematography, great music, and a surprisingly high number of moments of flat-out stellar animation. On the topics of Digibro and this show's music, he did criticize the use of that music for being too over the top, and trying to give scenes a bunch of weight when they didn't warrant that level of fanfare, so I've got to play defense on that front for a second. The scene he mentioned specifically is from episode 1, and involves Araki walking into a room in search of Majime and finding him. What gives this scene sufficient significance in order to warrant its presentation in my eyes is just how important Majime is. In the conversation from the beginning of this episode that I referenced, lamenting the lack of people like Majime, we learn that Matsumoto is growing too old and weak to do much work, and that Araki's own ability to do that will be significantly hamstrung by having to focus on caring for his sick wife. These are people who live for nothing but dictionaries, and they are succumbing to illness, a dying breed that are in danger of extinction and with it the death of their life's work. While the quest to find Majime is not that long or arduous, the incredible strangeness of Majime manages to impress upon us just how much of an unlikely godsend he really is, and so this music and visual presentation suit the weight this event holds for Araki perfectly, and when combined with all of that context, serves to convey that to us. Similarly to Rakugo Shinju, Fune wo Amu is a quote-unquote great show, one that ticks all the boxes, and would do rather well if you were to plug it into a given set review formula and calculate its score. While Rakugo is considered to be great by its small but not insignificant fanbase, Fune wo Amu's score is a bit more middling, placing it just inside the top 1,000 rated anime according to Mal. By and large, very few people actually want great anime, full stop. What a large portion of the masses want is simply a cool premise that captures their imaginations. What a large portion of those with allegedly more refined tastes want is for a premise they find cool or interesting to be executed fairly well. This is how slice of life, or the more pejorative slice of nothing ever happens, can become a condemnation of a series in and of itself. The idea that because it centers around high school girls whose lives don't have something particularly out of the ordinary going on, or possesses some kind of epic scale, a series has already excluded itself from being a great anime is not a selectiveness indicative of some kind of more discerning taste. It's just indicative of an inability to enjoy a portion of the medium even when executed remarkably well. Now this is fine, it's just people's personal tastes after all, but I must admit that to then see this restriction in what you can appreciate or enjoy celebrated, praised as proof of a kind of superiority to one's taste, is somewhat puzzling to me. Hibike Euphonium thankfully made a number of people realize that even this premise can result in really excellent works if they've got strong execution, but the reverse side of that coin is that it's also revealed those for whom hitting all of those checkboxes of quality, having multifaceted characters who grow and change, communicating information to the viewer subtly, lacking plot holes and out-of-character decisions, all of those things that us more critical types profess to look for in anime, doesn't really matter. It can do all of that, but ultimately if it doesn't have a premise that they like, they simply can't enjoy it. I say all of this not to shame those for whom high school settings just can't be interesting. What I want to do is to encourage some more critical self-reflection about what we really want out of anime. Many of us don't actually want great anime. We want those anime that already interest us based upon their surface elements to be great, and the rest we could generally care less about. All that being said, Fune wo Amu is actually really good, you guys, so go prove you have good taste by going out and enjoying it. If you'd like to help me make great videos, you can go check out my Patreon. There's a noticeable jump in quality on these ones that my editor does, so I'd love to reach a point where I can pay him to handle all of them. A big thank you to Chelsea Chester, Bill, Sam, Izumi69, Darian De Sotel, Joji Matthews, Chris Wagner, Culver James Kamai, and everyone else who's supporting me already.